The lecture hall aboard the Nurellen Star Academy was filled with the quiet hum of alien students preparing for their interspecies field training. Various species sat at their designated sections, their eyes and sensory appendages flicking toward the only human in the room. Darren Holt, a field instructor from Earth, leaned back in his seat, tapping his fingers on the desk. He had been assigned to mentor a group of Academy students for a planetary survey, a standard part of their curriculum. To the students, he was a fascinating anomaly. Humanity had gained a reputation for being physically fragile, yet dangerously unpredictable, a contradiction that perplexed most of the galaxy. Professor Urkel, a towering yellow wren with a pale blue carapace and 4 secondary limbs, stood at the front of the room. Your mission will take you to Ravix 4, a moon covered in dense jungle. You are to conduct a routine biological survey, documenting the ecosystem and its dangers. He paused, his bulbous eyes swiveling toward Darren. Remember, human biology is significantly more susceptible to external damage than your own. Holt is experienced, but I trust you will all exercise caution. Darren rolled his eyes but kept quiet. He had been through this spiel before. Aliens tended to assume humans were constantly on the verge of breaking. While it was true that humans lacked exoskeletons, redundant organs, or rapid tissue regeneration, they compensated in ways that often unsettled their alien peers. The students, however, took the warning seriously. Doric, a bipedal Kitalian with soft, luminous skin, turned to Darren with an expression that conveyed something between concern and curiosity. Instructor Holt, is it true that human limbs can detach if the force is sufficient? Darren blinked. What? No? Who told you that? The class murmured. A few students looked at each other as if unsure whether to believe him. Darren sighed. Listen, we bleed, we bruise, and yeah, we can get injured, but we don't just fall apart. A low chittering came from the back. Exella, a slender Varnian with a long, coiled neck, tilted her head. But your kind yelps in distress from even minor injuries. Surely that means pain is a great weakness to you. Darren smirked. Pain is a warning system. Doesn't mean we can't ignore it when we have to. The students didn't look convinced. The mission began without much issue. Ravix 4 was humid and teeming with insect-like creatures, most of which seemed content to ignore the group. The students, despite their academic brilliance, lacked field experience. They hesitated at every new sound, overanalyzed readings, and moved with the caution of prey animals expecting an ambush. Darren, on the other hand, walked through the thick foliage with practiced ease, hacking through vines with a machete. You're all overthinking it, he said, looking back at the group. Yes, there's wildlife. Yes, some of it might try to eat you, but standing still just makes you a snack. Sella shuddered. How can you be so casual about the possibility of being consumed? Darren shrugged. I've been in worse places. As the hours passed, the team grew more comfortable until an incident changed everything. While examining a nest of Ravixian burrowers, Darren felt a sudden, sharp pain in his forearm. Something had lashed out from the underbrush, a whip-like vine lined with razor-sharp barbs. Ah, damn it, Darren hissed, stumbling back. The students froze. Doric's eyes widened. You are injured. Darren glanced down. The vine had torn through his sleeve, leaving a deep gash just below the elbow. Blood was already seeping out, a bright red contrast against his pale skin. Zella recoiled. That is so much blood. Darren exhaled sharply, setting his jaw as pain flared through his arm. It's not great, but I'll live. Should we call for emergency extraction? Doric asked. Darren narrowed his eyes. What? No, it's just a cut. The aliens were already beginning to panic. Doric fumbled with a communicator, but Darren snatched it from his hands. I said no. You are leaking, Zella insisted. It's called bleeding, and it happens. Darren rolled up his sleeve, examining the wound. It wasn't pretty, but it wasn't lethal. All right, field patch time. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small medical kit. The students watched in horrified fascination as he dug out disinfectant, gauze, and a needle with suture thread. You're going to. Repair yourself. Doric's voice was hushed with disbelief. Darren sighed. What, you think I'm just going to sit here and let it get infected? He poured disinfectant over the wound, hissing through his teeth as it burned. The students flinched at the sound. Does that not cause you extreme distress? Zella asked. Yeah, it sucks, Darren admitted, but leaving it open would suck more. Carefully, he threaded the needle and positioned the wound under a small field light. His hands were steady, though his jaw was tight with discomfort. As he pushed the needle through his skin, the students collectively recoiled. Your own species forces you to endure this, Doric asked, horrified. Darren gave a strained chuckle. Not exactly. I could wait for a mid-bay, but we're in the field. You learn to deal with things yourself. The needle moved in and out with methodical precision. Darren kept his breathing steady, occasionally pausing to grit his teeth when the pain flared up. The aliens couldn't take their eyes off him. You experience pain but continue regardless, Zella murmured. That is unsettling. Darren pulled the last stitch tight and snipped the thread. Welcome to being human. He covered the sutures with gauze and wrapped his arm tightly before securing it with medical tape. The pain was still there, but it had dulled into something manageable. Doric stared at him as if he had just witnessed something unnatural. We assumed humans feared injury, that your expressions of pain meant weakness. But you, he hesitated. You are not weak. Darren smirked. Nah, we just complain a lot. Makes the suffering more bearable. The students remained silent, but Darren could tell their perspective had shifted. They no longer saw him as a fragile being to be protected. They saw something else, something that made them uneasy. Darren stood up, testing his arm. All right, lesson learned. Let's move. The students followed, but their expressions had changed. The human was not what they expected. Not at all. The rest of the survey mission continued, but something had shifted. Darren could feel it in the way the students looked at him. They had been wary of him before, but now it was different. They weren't just cautious around him, they were studying him. Zella, normally hesitant to engage in conversation, kept sneaking glances at his bandaged arm. Doric's bioluminescent skin flickered with a faint, puzzled glow every time Darren flexed his fingers. Even Professor Urkel, who had insisted on reviewing all field reports personally, had taken an unusual interest in Darren's post-injury condition. But Darren didn't dwell on it. He had a job to do. His arm was sore, but it was holding up fine, and that was good enough. The team had one more day of survey work before extraction, and Darren was determined to get through it without any more drama. It wasn't long before the questions started. While collecting plant samples near the riverbed, Zella finally voiced what had been on all their minds. You are certain you do not require medical intervention? Darren exhaled through his nose, carefully placing a specimen into a sample container. Told you, I'll be fine. Doric knelt beside him, observing his movements. But you are damaged. It's just stitches, Darren said. It's healing. What's the big deal? Doric hesitated, his luminescent patterns dimming. Injuries are significant. Most species require extensive care for such wounds. Darren shrugged. Yeah, and if it was worse, I would have gotten proper treatment. But for a field mission, we deal with it. Zella's head tilted. Is that why humans are considered unpredictable? Because you dismiss pain so easily. Darren gave a short laugh. Easily? Lady, that hurt like hell. He flexed his arm for emphasis. But what good would panicking do? The students exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Humans feel pain, Zella murmured. Yet you proceed as if it is an inconvenience. Darren smirked. Yeah, pretty much. Doric let out a quiet chitter, a sound Darren had come to recognize as Cathalian nervousness. And this is common. Some people are better with it than others, but yeah, Darren said. Pain isn't a death sentence. It just sucks. Zella tapped a clawed finger against her datapad. But you bleed so much. Your kind lacks protective plating, reinforced cellular structures, or redundant organs. Even minor wounds can be catastrophic. And yet, you behave as though she hesitated. as though your own limitations do not concern you. Darren stopped, leaning back on his heels. I wouldn't say that he thought for a moment. I know I've got limits. I just don't let them stop me from getting things done. Doric blinked slowly. You do not fear injury the way we do. Darren gave him a sharp look. Oh, I fear it just fine. You ever stub your toe? Worst pain in the universe. Zella did not laugh. But the pain does not dictate your actions. You endure it and adapt. Darren frowned. Well, yeah, what else are you supposed to do? Neither student had an answer for that. The last night on Ravix 4 was uneventful. The team gathered at the base camp, reviewing their findings. Darren sat near the fire, his arm propped up on his knee, absently flexing his fingers to keep the stiffness at bay. The pain had dulled into a throbbing ache, but he could live with it. The students, however, still weren't over it. Doric, Zella, and a few others sat in a loose semicircle around him, staring with what could only be described as fascinated horror. Darren sighed. All right, what is it now? Doric hesitated. We have reviewed human medical records. Darren arched an eyebrow. Oh! Zella shifted slightly. Your species has survived. Alarming injuries. Darren gave a small, amused nod. Yeah, we can be a bit stubborn about staying alive. Doric's glow flickered in a slow pulse. Some reports indicate humans have functioned despite fractured bones, internal bleeding, even he paused. Limb loss. Darren sighed. Yeah, that last one's rare, though. Not exactly ideal. Zella stared at him. You jest. Nope, Darren said, popping his shoulder. People have survived some real nasty stuff. The students seemed deeply disturbed. Doric's voice was quiet. How? Darren thought for a moment. Pain tolerance, medical advancements, sheer dumb luck, he tilted his head. And I guess a lot of willpower. Zella's tail curled around her. Your species should not function as it does. Darren grinned. Yet here I am. The students remained quiet for a long time. Extraction day arrived. The transport shuttle hovered above the jungle clearing, its engines humming as the team loaded their equipment. Darren climbed aboard, rolling his shoulders. His arm still ached, but it was manageable. Professor Urkel stood near the controls, his bulbous eyes settling on Darren. You will report to the medical bay upon arrival. Darren gave a lazy salute. Yes, sir. The professor turned to the students. What have you learned? Doric hesitated, glancing at Darren. Humans do not fear injury in the way we believed. Professor Urkel studied him. Explain. Zella's voice was quiet. Pain does not define them. They endure it, even when they should not. Urkel hummed. And what do you conclude from this? Doric's bioluminescent glow flickered erratically. Humans are dangerous, not because of their strength, but because of their defiance. Darren snorted. You make it sound way cooler than it is. The students didn't laugh. As the shuttle ascended, Darren leaned back in his seat, watching the students murmur among themselves. He had seen this reaction before. The moment when aliens realized humans weren't as fragile as they seemed. He knew they'd never look at him the same way again. The shuttle ride back to the Norellan Star Academy was quiet, but Darren could feel the weight of the students' stares. He wasn't new to this kind of reaction. He'd seen it before, usually the first time an alien saw a human push through something they thought should have been incapacitating. Still, he was getting a little tired of being treated like some kind of anomaly. Doric sat closest to him, his bioluminescence pulsing in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. You are still in pain. Darren smirked. Little bit he flexed his fingers and felt the pull of the stitches beneath the bandages. It wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't unbearable either. Zella, seated across from them, tilted her elongated head, and yet you make no effort to limit your movement. Darren raised an eyebrow. What, you want me to sit still and moan about it? That'd get old real fast. Doric hesitated. Most species would do exactly that. Darren sighed. Look, I already patched myself up. That's most of the battle. Now I just have to keep it clean and get checked out in the med bay. No need to make a big deal out of it. Zella flicked her tail, her species equivalent of skepticism. A deep wound should be treated immediately. Darren rolled his eyes. I know that, and I will, but we were in the field. Getting out of there safely was priority one. Doric's glow pulsed faintly. Your patience with injury is unnatural. Darren barked a laugh. Tell that to anyone who's had to wait in an Earth hospital for 6 hours with a broken arm. The students didn't laugh. The shuttle docked smoothly at the Academy's orbital station, and as soon as the doors opened, Professor Urkel gestured toward the hallway. Instructor Holt, Medical Bay. Now. Darren sighed, pushing himself up from his seat. Yeah. The students watched as he strode out of the shuttle, still moving normally despite the obvious discomfort. Doric and Zella exchanged glances, then followed behind at a cautious distance. The Norellan Star Academy's medical bay was a pristine, sterile facility staffed by a variety of medical professionals. The lead physician on duty, Dr. Velran, was a stocky Rythian with gray, rubbery skin and 4 eyes that flicked between Darren and the waiting medical bed. You sustained an injury, Velran asked, already scanning him with a handheld device. Darren sat down and held up his arm. Yeah, took a nasty hit from a razor vine. Cleaned it, stitched it up, but figured I should get a second opinion. Velran peeled back the bandages and made a noise deep in his throat. You performed these sutures yourself. Darren nodded. Had to. No medbay in the jungle. Velron's upper eyes blinked. Acceptable work. But human hands are not as precise as an auto-suture unit. I will redo them. Darren shrugged. Go for it. The students lingered near the doorway, watching with unnerving fascination. Dr. Velron disinfected the area and carefully removed Darren's stitches. The sharp tugging sensation wasn't pleasant, but Darren barely flinched. When Velron pulled out the auto-suture device, it worked quickly, sealing the wound with a nearly invisible stitch. A dermal regenerator followed, reducing the swelling and irritation. This will heal fully in a few days, Velran said. Had you sought medical attention immediately, it would have been faster. Darren smirked. I'll survive. Velran gave a slow blink. That is evident. The students, however, seemed almost disappointed. Doric shifted on his feet. You did not react at all. Darren arched an eyebrow. Was I supposed to? Zella frowned. The process of having your skin repaired, does it not cause distress? Darren flexed his fingers, testing the stiffness. Not really. Uncomfortable, sure, but I've had worse. Doric turned to Velran. Are all humans like this? Velran hesitated before responding. Human pain tolerance varies. However, species-wide they are. Unusual in their ability to withstand injury. Zella's tail twitched. This is why they are unpredictable. Velron made a low clicking noise. That is a common belief. Darren sighed, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. You guys really need to stop acting like I'm some kind of eldritch horror. I just did what anyone would do in my situation. Doric shook his head. That is incorrect. Most species would have immediately sought medical attention and ceased all strenuous activity. Zella nodded. You were still collecting samples less than an hour after sustaining an open wound. That is not normal. Darren huffed a laugh. Well, guess you're stuck with abnormal me, then. The students looked at each other, still clearly unsettled. Velran finished inputting the medical report and turned back to Darren. Your arm is stable. You may resume normal activity. Darren hopped off the medical bed and rolled his shoulder, already feeling the improvement. Appreciate it, Doc. Doric stepped forward hesitantly. You truly do not fear injury. Darren crossed his arms. I fear injury just fine. What I don't do is let it stop me from handling what needs to get done. He gave them a pointed look. Pain sucks, but freaking out over it just makes things worse. Zella observed him carefully. We assumed that because humans react so expressively to pain, you were vulnerable to it. Darren chuckled. Oh, we're definitely expressive. But being loud about something doesn't mean we can't handle it. Doric's glow flickered. Then humans are paradoxical. You express suffering, yet refuse to yield to it. Darren smirked. You're catching on. Velran, apparently satisfied with the exchange, turned away to deal with other patients. Darren started walking toward the exit, and the students hurried to follow him. As they made their way through the corridors, Doric's glow remained erratic. This changes how we must assess human durability. Darren snorted. What, you gonna write a report about it? Doric hesitated. Yes. Darren stopped mid-stride. Wait, you're serious? Zella nodded. Professor Urkel has already assigned us an analysis. Your behavior contradicts all previous assumptions about human fragility. Darren sighed. Man, I really am turning into a science experiment, huh? Doric tilted his head. Is that a complaint? Darren chuckled. Nah, just means I get to mess with you guys a little more. Zella's eyes narrowed. You are not joking about that, are you? Darren grinned. Not even a little. The students looked at him with a mixture of wariness and fascination. For the first time, Darren had the distinct feeling that they weren't just studying him anymore. They were trying to understand. Darren could feel the shift in the way the students moved around him. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was something closer to wariness. Like they had realized that humans weren't just another delicate, soft-skinned species, but something else entirely. Something they didn't fully understand. And he wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. Back in the academy's central atrium, he stretched his newly treated arm, rolling his shoulder as the last bits of stiffness faded. The dermal regenerator had done its job well, and by the time he finished his check-in with administration, the pain had dulled to nothing more than a mild soreness. The students, however, weren't done with him. Doric and Zella flanked him as he left the medical bay, their expressions still unreadable. He could practically hear the gears turning in their heads. Finally, Zella spoke. Instructor Holt. Darren sighed dramatically. Yes, Sexella. She hesitated, as if carefully choosing her words. This experience has altered our perception of humans. Darren smirked. That was kind of obvious. Doric's glow pulsed. You must understand. Most species react to pain in ways that align with their survival instincts. They retreat. They protect themselves. He gestured vaguely. Do not. Darren raised an eyebrow. Sure we do. We're not out here looking to get hurt for fun. Zella narrowed her eyes. And yet, when you were injured, you did not react with the urgency we expected. You did not panic. You did not retreat. You simply adapted. Darren exhaled. Yeah, because that's what you do when you're in the field. You think a soldier stops in the middle of a battle just because they got hurt, or a rescue worker pauses during an evacuation because they twisted an ankle. No, you push through and deal with it later. Doric shifted uncomfortably. That is not normal. Darren laughed. For humans, it is. Zella's tail coiled slightly. This is why your species unsettles the galaxy. Darren raised an eyebrow. Oh? And here I thought it was because we eat dairy. Doric made a quiet, exasperated noise. This is serious, Holt. Darren sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, I get it. You guys see pain as a hard stop. Like if you're injured, you're done. You think of it as an immediate threat. But for humans, it's just part of the equation. We don't like getting hurt, but we don't let it define what we can and can't do. Zella studied him. And this is why you succeed where others fail. Darren blinked. He wasn't expecting that. Doric nodded. Other species withdraw at the first sign of pain. Humans continue. It explains why your people endure situations that would cripple others. Darren tilted his head. Well, that, and we're just really stubborn. Zella still seemed unsettled, but her voice had a note of understanding. So it is not that you do not fear pain. Darren shook his head. Nope, we just don't let it control us. Doric's glow flickered in thought. That is terrifying. Darren smirked. Yeah, we get that a lot. They walked in silence for a while, the students clearly processing everything they had learned. Darren wasn't in a rush to break the quiet. He had seen this before. The moment when an alien realized humans weren't just another species, that there was something in them that wasn't quite normal. Finally, Zella sighed. This will be in our reports. Darren shrugged. Go for it. Just try to make me sound cool. Doric gave a slow, thoughtful nod. I believe. That will not be necessary. You are already unlike any species we have encountered. Darren chuckled. I'll take that as a compliment. The academy hallway stretched out before them, the faint hum of distant conversation filling the space. The students had come to a conclusion about humans, but Darren could tell it wasn't just an academic one. They had learned something today, something that would stay with them far beyond the classroom. And Darren? He had a feeling this wouldn't be the last time aliens looked at him like he was some kind of impossibility. With a grin, he stretched his arm one last time and kept walking, leaving the students to their thoughts.